the economics of Agile. Should I introduce you and say all the great things you did?
Keep going.
Okay.
He doesn't embarrass you.
No. So I have actually had the pleasure to work with Damon in a past life, in fact at Agile, and he's a great guy. And he has been working under the Agile banner and before Agile in general on the concepts of Agile, doing prose without knowing it for more than 20 years. And now he has started his own company. It's a new endeavor. He has a great blog. He has a book published on the web. He is now blooming into his own.
I don't think I can take much more. Thank you. And what we agreed on, what, 20? Okay, so I'm going to talk about economics of Agile, and we're going to get into actuarial tables and double. No, we're not. Okay. Right? But I'm going to try to make economics fun. Right? So we are going to talk about things like ROI and stuff like that, but I'm going to try to keep it fun. So, I didn't get up earlier to talk about Relativity because I really don't know who I'm associated with anymore. I've been doing a lot of work through Eliason, and pretty much all of my work has been through Eliason lately. So if you want me involved in doing something for you, just call Eliason and sort of cut out the middleman, I guess, there. But in any case, I think we already covered that. So this is the key takeaway. If you learn nothing out of tonight, this is all I'm trying to say, this one thing right here. Agile enables organizations to focus on business efficiency. And one of the things that most development organizations actually focus on is operational efficiency. And I'm here to tell you, that doesn't really matter. You might be thinking, oh my God, yes it does, don't say that. Well, okay, it's interesting, and you need to keep costs down, but we'll get into why that's important soon. Okay, so I always like to start out with sort of a why bother, like why are you here, what are you going to get out of this? And so I want you to choose which column you would rather have, column A or column B. Shout out at any time which column you prefer. Okay, so here we go. Column B has things like you're not able to take all vacation days.
Hey.
It's not clear how much work provides value. How your work actually provides value. You're working on boring projects. You're working on old technology, declining working conditions. Company is losing competitiveness. Your company's value is declining. You're not getting bonuses. Benefits are reduced. Salary is reduced. Working long hours. Project is shelved, canceled. Riffs, out of business. You want column B? No? Okay. There is actually no column A. Nobody wants column B, but column A is pretty much all of the opposite things, right? So that's why economics is actually important, right? Because we don't just get paid for no particular reason. Your company that you work for has to be viable for you to get paid, and for all these things to not be true, right? The way we often think about it is, you take a job. Who actually just started a job, like weeks ago? Anybody? Okay. Why are they paying you right now? You're good at what you do. So you say, but we don't know yet, right? So there's sort of a contract there that they hired you to pay you for your future value, right? And they're paying it out of their current bank account. You couldn't possibly have produced any value that made it back all the way to their bank account, now it's paying you, right? So unfortunately, one of the ways we think of it as an individual is, we do work, we get paid for that work. That's not really how it works. How it works is, there's the bank account, we're going to get money out of it eventually, right? Where does it come from? Well, it's coming from the old project, the old product that's out there. You didn't do it, you're new, right? It didn't get used by anybody. That's not where the money came from. It goes to the customer and they see some value. They say it's tangible. They're going to give you money. Then it goes into the bank account, and that's where you get paid, right? But that's the old product. You didn't have anything to do with it. So then we go product management, and they figure out what we're going to do, hopefully something good, right? They give you something to do, right? The company gives you something to do. You take whatever it is that they gave you, like a user story or whatever, and you add your value, right? If you write code, you've added value. You still shouldn't get paid yet, actually, but probably nobody wants me as a manager anymore, right? So,
Check your mic.
Huh?
Check your mic.
Okay, we'll go with that. Backup strategy there. All right, so you do something to what they gave you, whether it's you've got code and you tested it, you wrote code on a user story, whatever, you have now done something that hopefully will be worth value, right? So then other people work on that to produce the finished product. That goes into a product. Eventually it ships. Oh, whoops, it was canceled. You still shouldn't get paid, right? Or it's shelved. Anybody know what shelved is a euphemism for? Canceled, but we're not ready to admit it yet. Right? It's shelved. We'll get back to it. No, you won't. All right, so eventually you get a product that's out on the market and it's new, and that's producing value. Now you should get paid. Right? We're going to pay you anyway because we're a nice company, but basically this is how it works, right? Stories come in, somebody says we should do this, you provide value, it goes into the new product, goes through this whole loop. That's a loop that's very important, and that's really how you get paid. If you're not participating in this loop, you personally are not providing any actual value, right? So that's something to keep in mind if you're working for me. Right, but actually this is true for everybody. It's just not that clear all the time. That's why I like to bring it out, to make it really clear. Okay, so this product, it's a mystery product. I don't know what this product is. I'm not going to actually tell you what it is. It almost doesn't matter. What's the one thing you know about its cost?
Too much.
It's too much. That's right. It's too much. Actually, another way to say it is, I don't know. I don't know what it costs, right? Repeat after me. How much does it cost?
I don't know.
I don't know, right? All right, so the next question is, how much value is it going to produce?
I don't know.
I don't know, that's right. It's like an AA meeting here or something. So next question is, you've got two different approaches you could use, multiple approaches you could use to produce this product. Which one of these are you going to use? Now maybe I'm a little tricky here. It's A, actually, because A is going to produce more value. Right, so, but unfortunately, we normally focus on the cost, the operational efficiency. What's going to cost the least, right? Why do we do that? Well, because of this little graph. Right, so that, wow, that came out purple on there. That's interesting. Anyway, the value line there, you're producing some amount of value. You can't make it go up, and luckily it's not going down. That's good, right? Some amount of value that has a cost. How can we increase profits? Reduce costs. But there's a little problem with that. What happens there?
Quality goes down, value goes down.
No, your company's gone. There's no company when your costs are zero, right? There's no company left. So that works really well. So you get these cycles, right? We hire. New CEO comes in, makes Wall Street happy because he reduced costs by letting people go. But that doesn't work for very long. You have to produce more value. So there's this other thing that I want you to think about, which is this one. Assuming costs stay even, which they're not, they're going to go up to some degree if you do more things. But find ways to produce more value, right? Because the more value you produce, the more profits you're going to get. This is infinitely expandable, right? So it's much better. That's where you want to focus. Now you're probably thinking, wait, but we're in IT. How is this going to help anything? Well, because really there is the distinction between the business and IT is sort of an artificial one. You work for a company that produces value. Everybody has their part, right? No IT, no value. No business, no value. So this is kind of how it works. Now the value that you produce, different companies produce value in different ways. This is about economics, so I'm mostly going to concentrate on money. But you know, saving whales has value. That poor whale didn't actually get saved, but you know, going to the moon, trading moon rocks. You know, I guess it wasn't actually economic, but you know, there was some value there. Saving people in Haiti, right? The software for coordinating rescue there, and my personal favorite, spending time on the beach because you can, right? Or retirement, whatever. So that's really your return on investment right there. Okay, so you may be on to me now. I'm asking trick questions, but which project, A, B, C, or D, cost remaining the same, would you invest in? Excellent. Okay, now I have an experiment for you. Hang on a sec. I'm going to need complete quiet for this experiment. All right, so I got about $100 here, real money. This is real. Here's a race. I need quiet though. Whoever comes up to me and gives me however much money, I will give you double back. Whoever's first. There's just one problem. I didn't say when. But thanks. Yeah, I could make a lot of money that way. But I don't think I'd stay alive long. So there's this little problem called the time. Thank you for illustrating that, by the way. Forever on tape. There's this little thing called the time value of money, right? That red line is, I should have left the money in the bank, right? So A is actually a bad investment. It turns out that the one that looked like the worst investment is the best investment because we were able to get it to market soonest, right? All of it, most of the other projects we shouldn't have bothered because we would have done better leaving the money in the bank. So now sometimes people think, well, but wait a minute, Damon, that's not helpful for me because we can only release once a year. Yeah, okay. How many people use GWT? Or how about Dojo? Something like that. Okay, so there's some people using those technologies. So let's say at the beginning of a one-year project, you decide to use Dojo. After a year, somebody comes to you and says, wow, this is just not working. We should have used GWT. All the stuff that you did on top of Dojo now is useless. Are you going to go back? Probably not. So actually learning has value too. Learning is exactly the same as value, right? So the more you can learn earlier, the better off you're going to be. And that has economic impact as well. Okay, so I've already sort of done some of this reframing of ROI, but one of the things that happens is since we focus on cost, the cost becomes what's called a proxy for the value. When we focus on how can we reduce costs, how can we be more efficient, how can we compare this team's velocity against that team's velocity, because we want to reward the people with a high velocity and, I don't know, flog the people with a low velocity or something, right? So but that's focusing on operational efficiency. What if the team with the low velocity is producing the most value? Are you going to give them a hard time for that? But if it's not clear the link between the value and that team, that's a problem, right? So don't focus on cost. I'm not saying spend all your money like crazy, right? But don't focus on that. Focus on the business value. Everything else will fall out from that. So the next thing that comes up is, who is your customer? How many people here work for or produce software for a business unit? Okay. That's not your customer. You may be thinking that that's your customer, but that's not your customer. One of the things that happens there is you get a division between the business unit and IT. Business thinks of IT as, those people over there. And IT thinks of business as, those people that don't understand what we do over there, right? But really, you have one thing. You have your offering as a company. Don't think of it as a business unit and IT. Think of it as our offering. We're working on this together. Your customer is the actual customer of that business unit, not the business unit. Okay, so as I've been saying, predicting return is hard, right? So of the two things, value or cost, which would you rather estimate that a product will produce? Which one would you rather estimate the cost or the value? Cost is easy, right? That's another reason we focus on it. But I want you to think of every feature, every story that you produce as a scratch ticket. Now the odds on scratch tickets, not so good. But a feature is the same way. You know what it costs, right? Or you could know what it's going to cost. I'll talk to you about that in a moment. And then there's some unknown value. But generally the odds are good, right? 2 to 1, 3 to 1, something like that, in your favor. Right? So they're really good scratch tickets, but they don't always have any value. And you don't necessarily know which story is going to produce the value, but that's how I want you to think about it. So how can we measure cost? Now, I know as I go through this, some of the Agile folks in here are going to want to flog me as I talk about this. But you'll see where we end up at the end. Okay, so in traditional planning, how do you measure cost? You go through all this stuff, requirements document, Gantt chart, right, hours and blah, 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 and how many hours on this project, and percentage, and, you know. How accurate do you think that is? I mean, how many people think that's actually accurate? Right, because we forgot that I was 50% on this project and 20% on that one, and I only put on my hours for one project, right? It's hard to keep track of, unless you have somebody out there full-time keeping track of everybody's hours and maybe punching a clock for the projects, right? It's not going to be that accurate. Yeah, even then. But with Agile, we can calculate the cost per point. Here's the formula. I don't expect you to remember this or memorize this. I'm going to go through each piece bit by bit. But you need stories, you need a cross-functional team, story points, backlog, iteration length, and velocity. So I'm not going to go into these in any great detail, but just to quickly review them. How many people are using user stories today? Okay. If you're not, you definitely should. But this is what a user story looks like. It's plain English title for the work that you're going to do. And you can have, more complicated requirements behind this, but it's a plain English thing that the doc person can use, the customer can use, the business person can use, the tester can use, the coder can use, everybody can use and understand. And it has this general format. Some people use other formats, it's just one format. The next thing you need is a cross-functional team. Now by cross-functional, what I mean is every discipline needed to put a user story or a task or a requirement or enhancement out. Right? So if you have people that are in UAT, that person should be part of that team. Product management, part of that team, developer, all these roles, part of that team. And I actually include the manager too. I don't like excluding the manager. Sometimes Scrum likes to say, managers are bad, right? It doesn't quite come out and say that, but you can read it between the lines. Let's keep them out of the room. Well, if you got a bad manager, you got a bad manager. Scrum's not actually going to help you with that, right? So cross-functional team. Now, sometimes people think of this as cross-functional people that can do anything. I think those are mostly the people that can do anything. I don't know many people that can do everything. Another way to think about cross-functionality also is that you're cross-functional across layers. Oftentimes, people have layers. They've got the front-end team, the middle layer team, and the back-end team. That's actually not cross-functional. You want to have people that can cross all layers on the team. That's cross-functional. The next thing you need is story points. Now you might be thinking, when I look at that, I don't think story points. I don't either. But let's imagine that we need to dig a ditch. And it's 1,000 feet long. All right? Now, with this ditch digger, now this is better than a shovel, right? If you got the business end back here, that's going to dig a ditch pretty quick. Let's say we can do 1,000 feet in one day. Not too bad. All right, so we're going to estimate that in hours. Now, estimating in hours is interesting, but what if you estimated in hours for this, and then it turns out that you've got this to use? Now, there's the business end. Now, somebody told me, oh, that's from like some sci-fi. No, that's in Germany. They use this today. It's a real thing. I kind of want one of those. There's a person right there. So, yeah, so this is not going to take a day. It's just lower and we're done, right? But I might think that the smallest ditch that I dig is about 1,000 feet. So we're going to call that one story point. A mile-long ditch, we're not going to call that's about 5 times. We're not going to call that a 5, because now I got to do permitting and I got to do other things, and there's probably like those gas lines I got to deal with. We'll call that an 8, because it's about 8 times as much work, regardless of which one I use. I got a 1 and an 8. This one's just going to do it faster, right? So it's the same thing when we're developing products. I've got new people, I've got people that have been doing this for a while. So if the architect, who's been doing this for a long time, says, oh, that's an hour, and then you got the new guy that comes in and says, I can't do this in an hour, and he does it in 2 days, is it fair to penalize him? No. So that's why story points. So the other thing you need to calculate by story points, obviously, story points. That's a quick explanation of story points. The next thing you need is a backlog. Now, one of the cool things about backlog is it's actually an economic tool. We'll get into that in a moment, but you need a backlog to say, these are the stories that I'm going to do, and this is the order that I'm going to do them. And then you need to organize them into iterations. Now, iterations are just a period of time, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, that you're going to get an increment of work done. So, and shippable. Now, you might think I can't do much in 2 weeks or 4 weeks. Lots of people do. It can't be done. We're not going to talk about that too much. But whatever your iteration length is, it should be constant. And let's say in this case it's 2 weeks long. And I know that my team, my cross-functional team, in general, can accomplish 20 story points worth of work every iteration. So let's say every 2 weeks. That means I've got 20 points after 2 weeks, 40 after 4, etc. I could calculate how many story points I can get done a year. Right? So, how to calculate? So I did this for real at AccuRev. I took a team and I said to the controller, how much does it cost for this team fully loaded? Benefits, rent, all that kind of stuff. They said, you can stop explaining how I do my job, I'll just give you the number. And that was the number, right to the penny. Not sure why that was important, but right to the penny. You know, he's an accountant, so he's very accurate. Or a controller, I'm sorry, whatever. So given that, right, and a couple other things, like I know the iteration length, I know how many iterations they do per year, what their velocity is, I know their annual velocity of 572 points. Divide one by the other, boom, 1,400 story points. Now, I'm going to give you the plus and minus of this. The plus of this is it's an interesting number to use if you're a product owner. I'll give you a real case, again, from AccuRev. Verizon Wireless said to a salesperson, I want to give you $40,000. The salesperson said, well, that'd be great. So what's the catch? And they said, well, you know, AccuRev is cool and all that, but there's this bug we found in the Eclipse plugin, and there's this enhancement we'd really like. And the sales guy came to me and he said, can we do it? And I said, oh, well, let me find out. So we talked to the developers and they said, 5 story points for all that stuff. 5 times 1,400, 7,000 for 40,000. Seems like a good deal. Boom. Right? But now if you've got another story that's coming along and you know it's 5 story points, and there's somebody that wants it and they're willing to pay 3,000 for it, or you're not really sure who wants it, then you can immediately say, it's not worth it. The downside of calculating cost per story point is, you know, it sort of gets into the how do I measure teams and all that kind of stuff. You cannot compare teams by velocity. That's like comparing teams by cost, right? It doesn't make any sense. If you want to compare teams, then ask their manager how they're doing, right? See what they can do differently. Are they producing value? Are they getting shippable increments of work done? That's important and interesting. Comparing story points is not. Okay, so the other way I can use this for calculating is I can say, I want to do this big project, and I've got about $200,000 on me to spend. I can estimate it out, and I can say, all right, well, if I've got 200,000, I can do to here, right? And I can look at that backlog, that work, and say, can I produce something of value that the market will like with that, or not? Oh, I didn't realize I can only get that little bit with 200K. You know what? I think I'll invest in this other project. Right? So don't even start. It's really, really easy to calculate cost with Agile and do quick portfolio management decisions. All right, so enough about cost. Another way to increase, on the economic side, something that you can do is increase revenue by reducing waste. Yep?
The prediction of cost is based on an assumption that your story point estimates aren't going to grow over the course of the project.
If your story point estimates are growing over the course of the project, you might have an issue, right? Because since story points are relative scale, the relative scale shouldn't change. It may be that your velocity increases, but then that should mean your cost goes down.
Well, we find story points increasing for a multitude of reasons. One, the initial estimate is done based on 2 to 4 hours worth of high-level discussion, and then you have your sprint zero, and then you get your real estimates, and now you've doubled the number of story points. Then halfway through, you learn something, and it's gone up 50%.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I forgot to reframe the question for the video. But the question was, but wait a minute, what if our estimates were wrong? That's going to throw the cost off. You're absolutely right. So if you're doing a brand new project, it's going to be hard to get accurate estimates no matter what you do. You really need to do a sprint or two to get a feeling for it. So, but as far as like if you've got an ongoing project and you're trying to determine whether or not to invest, adding a new team or something like that, you can do that. If it's a new project, it probably makes more sense to do a sprint or two, and likely that's short money compared to doing it for 2 years and then deciding we don't really have a product here. Okay, so unfortunately, I can't tell you what the value of that project is going to be. Nobody can. Even if you have a contract in hand, right? People say, no, I know, I've got this contract. And then the company goes out of business. Oh, guess you couldn't, right? So you really can't predict the future. But one of the things you can do is if you think something has value, you can do it quicker, or work to maximize the value. So I don't know how valuable something is. It's going to have some value X. If I can multiply that value, that's good. Those are the kinds of things that you definitely can do. So let's look at some of those examples. Right, so I'm working on this project and I'm not doing Agile, and most of the stuff is not used. Well, that's too bad. So don't do that. Right, now you might say, well, how do I know in advance what those things are? Well, if you're doing a traditional project, you don't. But if you're doing it increment by increment, your users will start to tell you, you really ought to stop doing stuff in that area because we're not using it. I'd really prefer that you do stuff in this other area, right? So then the worst one is what we already talked about, canceled or shelved. That's just pretty much a waste of money. It's not only just a waste of money for the developers, it's actually a waste of money for everybody. All those people back here that were doing specification of requirements was a waste of their time. The architects waste, the planners waste, coders waste, the testers waste, the document people waste. All that money's gone. Bad thing. So, not a good thing there. Yep.
The money might be gone, but the learning only has a chance to be wasted in the future.
So the money might be gone, but we learned a lot. That's true.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. I think I'd rather have the money, though. It's just me. I don't know. So, okay. So the next thing you can do is, there's this concept called the cost of delay. And this actually comes from Don Reinertsen. Any Don Reinertsen fans here? Okay, we got a couple up front. Don Reinertsen, brilliant guy. I first met him by going to a Lean conference where Mary Poppendike was in the front, and she was kind of shaking her head like, who is this guy? And I was thinking to myself, who is this guy? It was one of those awkward moments where you're like, why did they invite this guy to be the keynote at an Agile conference when he doesn't know what he's talking about? And then it turned out that he was flanking us, and he came around and showed that he actually understood Agile better than we did. It's pretty amazing. So, highly recommend his books, Don Reinertsen. One of the things he talks about is cost of delay. Now, he talks about cost of delay from the perspective of a whole product. Anybody employees here? Okay, actually this is going on video, so maybe I shouldn't do that anyway. All right, who can I pick on here? I got a better, turn the video off, okay. I got a better idea, I'll flip this around.
John?
No.
Okay.
That just makes it worse. What did he say?
But oh my God.
The biggest video we've ever had.
Yeah, there's some controversy there, right? Okay, so let's flip it
I
around.
can edit though.
Yeah, well, let's flip it around. So, how many people, now that we've seen the value of the iPad, especially that iPad 3, huh? The new iPad, it's not iPad 3. All right, how many people want to join with me in creating a competitor to that thing and making a lot of money, huh? Nobody? Why? Because the opportunity is pretty much gone, right? And if we're, as a company, waiting until now to do that, the cost of delay is incredible, right? All that opportunity gone. Now you can do that exact same thinking on a feature. So I've got a feature, this is the value curve of it over time. There's no value initially, nobody wants a touchscreen phone, don't want it. Then it comes out, people are like, ooh, that's cool. All kinds of value, and then eventually we get the telepathic phone. Nobody wants a touch phone anymore. I don't know what it's going to be, but there's always something, right? There's always something.
Google Glass.
The what?
Google Glass.
The Google Glasses, yeah. Wasn't that announced on April Fool's, though? No, okay. They did it, oh, that's right, the Morse code phone. Pretty cool. Okay, so in any feature, there's when you decide to do it, and when the market emerges, when the user can actually use it, and when there's no more value. So if we look at a particular feature, right, you decide to do it out here, a little late, but not that late, right? The market's just starting, but then you take forever to deliver it, and then there's no value. So you probably shouldn't have done it. Now, this is very similar. What I think of is, you know what? We finally got all the requirements done. Huh? How about that? It took us 3 years. Nobody wants it anymore, but we got it all done. Right? So getting things done is not the focus. The value of those requirements that you have will not live forever. It will not live forever. Right? The value goes up and it comes back down. Usually pretty darn fast these days. So this is the cost of the delay. All that value you could have gotten that you're losing. So I'm going to give you a painful example from my personal life, or my professional life. So back at Accurate, years ago, we used to say, hey, Accurate is so cool. Here's what it'll do. You know that thing you have on your whiteboard? You can put it into the system and it will magically and visibly keep track of how your process works, but we can't show it to you. Interested?
Paperware.
No. Well, on the command line you could. You could do a command line command, and it would show you the relationships. It would show pairwise relationships between different development projects. How about now? That's still no interest. Okay, good. Well, how about if we visualize it for you? All of a sudden, people started buying it. And they were buying it before, but sales more than doubled, even though we increased the price. We doubled the price, but sales more than doubled. And we're like, well, how is that possible? And they said, because of that one visualization thing. Now, this visualization thing was done as a complete UI rewrite, which took a year. Guess when that was ready? After a month. It was ready after a month.
Oh.
So 11 months of revenues lost, right? We had to wait 11 months to start getting those higher revenues. If we had put it out right away when it was ready, we could have brought forward, even today, 11 months of revenues, right? So, a little painful for me, but fun for you. Okay, so that's an example. So maximizing value. How can you maximize value? Well, this is an economics tool right here, right? What is this saying? This is saying, I'm going to work in order on the stuff that has the most value to the least value. What you're doing is you're splitting your product into pieces. You're making those little scratch tickets. So let me ask you this. Which would you rather do? Make a whole bunch of small bets or one giant bet that might never pay off? A whole bunch of small bets, right? So that's what a backlog is doing. It's making a whole bunch of small bets, and you're trying to maximize which bets you make that have the best odds. So if this is a good idea, why don't we take it to the logical extreme? We've got a story. We know its cost, 8 story points. We don't know its value, but we'll guess it's that much. Good a guess as any. So it's 8 story points. That's bigger than 1. What if we split it? Now which one do you want to do? The one on the left. Column A, I guess. Yeah. Well, anyway. So the one on the left. And now the one on the right, don't bother. Don't bother. I don't know what the value is, but I would much rather do this one than that one, because I don't think there's a good ROI there. I think I'm going to lose money on that. So that's the basic idea there. So splitting and splitting and splitting. I'll give you a concrete example. How many people have already seen this slide? Okay, good. It's like the slide that's in every presentation. I know you've seen it, Ron. This is not a new slide. Ron asked me to put new stuff in. There's a lot of new stuff in here, but not this one. Okay, so who knows the name of this bridge? What is it?
Second bridge.
Zakum Bridge, that's right. You ask anywhere outside of 50 miles from here, nobody knows. Now, what's that other bridge out west? That big,
San Francisco.
the Golden Gate Bridge, that's right. Everybody, I just said, the one out west, right? So the interesting thing is, the business value of this bridge was supposed to be, it's a cultural landmark. Unfortunately, nobody knows what it's called outside of this area. So, oops, didn't work so much. Now, another interesting thing when I was putting this together a long time ago is I noticed that thing. What's that? I think in software we call it a bolt-on. And here in Boston, we use really strong epoxy on these things. Sometimes. So anyway, if you were a civil engineer, would you want this picture in your portfolio? No. Why? It doesn't look right, right? It looks like, oops, I made a mistake. Now the interesting thing is, if there's any structural engineers in here, what do you think this does to the mathematics and the complexity of this structure? Puts it up there, right? And things that are more complex are more expensive, right? To the tune of $11 million per lane. Now, you might be thinking, hey, that's pretty good. In Boston, that's pretty good, right? How'd they get away with that? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But the interesting thing is, now there's this nondescript bridge. Who knows the name of this one? Yeah, even in Boston, nobody knows. The Lever Connector. Okay, so we got one person that knows. And are you sure about it? Positive. Would you bet money on it? Okay, good. Well, then I guess it's the Lever Connector.
Yes, what's the name of the river it's going to?
Yeah. Okay, this is my show now. So the interesting thing is, this one is only $5 million per lane. Right now, this is something that we do in software, right? We don't know when the next release is going to come out, and we don't want to be unprofessional and tell the customer we didn't think of that. Because you know what? When you release it and that feature's not in there, you look like an idiot that it's not in there, because it's obvious to everybody now that it should have been in there. And it's going to be another year, right, until they get it. So that's too bad. But, right, so one of the things about Agile is we want to do the simplest thing that we possibly can so we can save the money for a rainy day so that when somebody asks for that, we can give it to them right away. Now who looks more professional, right? We do. So you tally that all up. $60 million saved if they had built this bridge by doing a series of these. Now, I'm not a civil engineer, so I don't know. It's just an analogy, it's just an example. But the idea is, instead of doing all this stuff that we think will be useful or somebody might want, do the stuff that you know for sure, see what the result is, and then go on from there. And if you haven't already read Eric Ries's book, Lean Startup, definitely read that. It's a fantastic book, and it's all about that particular subject. All right, so just a couple of things. I've got a whole presentation on splitting user stories, but just to give you an example, right, how can you do it? One way is you can look at acceptance tests. So this one says that a traveler wants to send an email to the site. This is like a Tripit competitor. I'm not going to do a Tripit competitor, but anyway, let's say we were. And the acceptance test is, this story is acceptable if it handles a hotel booking, an airline booking, and a car booking. Well, you know what? That's actually 3 stories. Let's split it out like that. And then you can do that again. You can say, well, for the hotel, the acceptance test is I can accept a hotel booking from Marriott, Hilton, Motel 6. And we're doing some promotions for those 3, so any other hotel doesn't matter. We're just going to do these 3. All right, well, let's do 3 different user stories. Now, you might notice that the numbers are going up, right? So 5 turned into 6. Well, that's because when we work on estimating smaller things, we have a better idea of what it's going to cost. So it's more accurate. That's another good reason to do it. That's one example. There's a whole bunch of techniques for splitting user stories. I'm not going to get into them, but these are some of them. So acceptance tests I talked about. Create, read, update, delete is a popular one. Often people like to create new legacy projects. They call them new projects, but they're actually new legacy projects. So we're going to replace the old legacy project. We're going to take 3 years to do it, and then guess what you got? A new legacy project, which you might actually never go live with. So one of the techniques is grafting new technology onto old, because that actually does work. So I got this handy dandy little quadrant chart. So when you're looking at a user story, here's how to decide what to do. You think to yourself, if you're the product manager or whatever, is it high cost, low cost? You don't have to know the exact figure, but just think about it. Is it high cost, low cost, high value, low value. If it's high cost and low value, don't do it. I don't care who's screaming at you. Right? If they're screaming, I gotta have it. Why? Because I like it. Is anybody gonna pay for it? Well, it's a good idea, right? But if somebody's screaming really loud and they won't go away, and they have good reason, we're gonna lose this customer or whatever, and you're thinking nobody else needs it, but you're gonna lose that customer, that's actually high value, not low value. If you can't convince yourself that it has high value, don't do it, right? And then there's the easy ones, low cost, high value. Just do that, right? And if it's high cost, high value, just because it's high value doesn't mean that you should do it as is. Split it, right? If it's high cost, that means it's complicated. There's a lot to do. Split it. Make it a whole bunch of smaller things, and look at the things that when split have not a lot of value. Do those last. And if you keep doing them, saving them for a rainy day, and the rainy day never comes, great. That's a good thing. So, what this should look like. Did I get a woo over there? Oh. My fan Marina over there. So what this should look like is you should be doing this all the time. And if you could see this, the twos are staying twos, but that's just because I got bored. But anyway, you want to take stuff, look at it, split it, put the story where it belongs. See, there's a lot of stories going to the bottom, and some of this stuff is just never getting done. That's good. That means you're focusing on finding the most value in doing that. And by doing that, you're reducing your costs. I don't know how much, but you're reducing costs and increasing value, right? Because you're spending most of your time on valuable things. I don't know how much value, but producing more value at lower cost, that's got to be good, right? All right, so what else can we do? We can reduce cycle time. What is that? What is cycle time? Well, cycle time is something that's very big in Kanban. Anybody doing Kanban today? Awesome. So what is Kanban? Right away, I'm going to provide value for you. It's not Kanban, it's Kanban. So if you're at a party or something and somebody says Kanban, you can look really smart. You just say, no, it's Kanban. Oh, how'd you know that? I know a Japanese guy. I'm not Japanese, but. All right, so what does Kanban look like? It doesn't look exactly like this. This is just an idea, right? So you got your backlog. This looks a lot like Scrum, doesn't it? If you're doing Scrum, you're almost doing Kanban. I'm not going to get into exactly how to move from Scrum to Kanban, but if you're doing Scrum, you're almost doing Kanban. Right, so you've got these things divided up, right? You've got, you put limits in there. So what this is saying is, I'm only going to allow, this is a very simple example, I'm only going to allow 3 things in each of these columns. Anything more than that, I'm going to say, no, I can't start working on that. But we'll call that a rumble strip, right? So the rule is I can't go over 3, but if I have to, I have to. It's like, you're driving down the road in, say, Massachusetts on 95, and you see some crazy guy, it's probably him, driving behind you and about to hit you. And there's a car on the left, and you're in the rightmost lane. What do? You go into the shoulder, and you hear the rumble strip, and you're like, oh, yeah. Right? So it's there as a warning. You're doing something you might not want to be doing, but if you got to do it, you got to do it. Right? So you got this rumble strip that says have no more than, say, 3 things in the testing column. Right? So let's look at quickly how this looks. It's pull-based. So I said, all right, I started coding, now I'm done coding. Right? So then the test folks can say, all right, that's great. Oh yeah, I forgot I got my animation a little wrong there. So these guys are kind of full up. So the developer's going to come over and help. Because it's more important to get this, whatever it is, to the end and done than it is for me to be efficient as a developer. It may be inefficient for me as a developer to go help the test people, right? Because developers are only good at doing the happy path. The unhappy path they don't see the point in, right? That's no fun. And the QA people aren't really sure what, why we should do anything other than break things, apparently. But anyway, so we're going to come over, help, get that story done, and the product owner has accepted that story. In the meantime, now the developer can go, back, and we can pull another story for the QA person to work on. And now the developer can do what he really likes, which is working on the happy path. So that's the basic idea behind Kanban. Why does that matter? I hope you're all sitting down. All right, so how many people are already doing Scrum right now? Yeah, so you're already sprinting to death, right? Sprint and then sprint and then sprint. hopefully some of you are doing iterations instead of sprints, right? Because sprints are kind of exhausting. But anyway, you know, this is what Kanban looks like. And we get it to done, and then we, oh, wait, we don't stop. You just keep going forever, on and on and on, story after story until you die. But no, we have sustainable pace here. So we're going to go at a sustainable pace. We're not going to go too crazy, right? So this is actually the most efficient way to deliver business value. It doesn't mean that I'm going to ship as soon as I get a story done, but I could. And even if somebody doesn't pay me for that, they can look at it and tell me, I have no interest in that. Or, wow, this is fantastic. Please do more of that. And anything that you're doing on a regular basis, you're going to get good at. If you only put a release out once a year, or even once a month, you're actually not that good at releasing. So for those of you that haven't read the Eric Ries book, I'll give you a quick preview. So Eric Ries is the founder of a company called IMView. It's, I don't know what it's doing now, 50, 60, $70 million a year. And they put out releases 50 times a day. I'm not kidding. Now you're probably thinking, well, they're some silly avatar, 3D avatar for gamers company or something, right? Well, actually, yeah, that is what they do. But, hey, $50, $60 million, I'll take that. So what do they do? What they do is they have a load balancing system, which many of you probably have, right? And so they put the new release, 50 times a day, on one of those servers, and they measure the revenue per hour. If it goes up, hey, it's a feature. If it goes down, that's a defect, and they take it out. If it's a feature, they put it onto other servers and keep spreading it and spreading it 50 times a day. Now, I don't know that everybody's ready to do that. I know that one company is doing it. I know a couple of companies that produce releases a couple of times a day, 5, 6, 7 times a day, that are financial companies with millions of dollars on the line if they mess up. And they're doing it. You can do it too. So let's bring this all together, because you're probably thinking, well, that's really great for a single team. But if you have multiple teams now, I can only do 4 teams in PowerPoint. But I know teams, I've worked with companies that have 10, 20 teams in one program with a single deliverable, 40 and even 80. Now, I'm not saying that they're all doing Kanban today, right? Only a few people raise their hands. Kanban is kind of new. But even if you're doing Scrum, you can do a lot of this. Right, so imagine 80 teams. This can be done and is being done. Right, so I've got small user stories. I got a master backlog. I got agile teams, short cycle time. I'm using Kanban. Yeah, I can do that. Right, so even for large programs, I can work like I'm a very small team. Right? And so imagine this is your company. Somebody asks for something, and it goes through this cycle that quickly. Well, obviously not that quickly, but it's much better than the sort of gridlock that is traditional development or even Scrum. Right? Because what happens in Scrum a lot is you've got these 4 teams all working together, and these stories are waiting till the end of the month, and these stories are waiting till the end of the month, and they're doing continuous integration at the team level, not the whole product level. And then what do you have? Then you have hardening sprints and integration sprints and offset QA and dev. We do the QA a month after they did the development. That's actually not continuous integration, right? So you can run into the same problem with Scrum, is basically, like gridlock or hardening of the arteries, right? This is a very healthy system. And anytime this system can't get a story to go zoop, they've got a problem, right? So most of the time, if you're doing that, working by exception and fixing problems as soon as they happen, you've got a very healthy system. And most of the time, you don't have to worry. As soon as something goes wrong, you know. In a traditional system, or even with Scrum, it can take a long time before you realize you got to go to the doctor. Right? Basically, you got a problem somewhere. All right, so that is the takeaway. If you're interested in starting with Agile, I've got this 30-page book. There's no strings attached, no email you have to put in, no cookies. Just go there and grab it, and you can get started. And I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for coming. Just like to get that out of the way. And then I think we got some time for questions. Not all at once. Okay, and do I have a mic runner?
Another, you mentioned it a couple times, saying maybe not a best practice, but even across several teams that I manage, their estimates are wildly different. Where I would say this team would come up and they say, oh, that's an 8-point story. Another one comes up, not because it's any smaller, but, or even they're more talented. They just say that's a 3-point story. So, how do you value teams against teams?
Okay,
in that?
so if you have two teams and they're both producing the exact same stories for the exact same reason, then you could do that. But you probably wouldn't do that because it'd be a little silly to produce the same product twice, right? So often what you've got is this team is doing, the UI, and they're working in, say, GWT, so Java or whatever, and then you get somebody on the back end that's doing stored procedures and triggers and that kind of stuff. Whole different ball of wax, whole different complexity. How would you compare that work? I don't know, right? So I would say it's interesting to think about that, but again, that's getting back to operational efficiency, that kind of stuff. And I would say, while it's interesting, you want to focus on the business value produced and make sure that you're getting to shippable increments, right? Every 2 weeks you have something that you can ship, if you're using Scrum, for instance, and not that you do ship. If a team can't, you got a problem. That's the real problem, if they can't, right? And often the truth is they can't, right? So at the end of the 2 weeks, you have a milestone. 2 weeks have passed, but it doesn't all work. The testing's not done, right? So that's a problem. So I would focus more on how are they running into problems and dealing with them, rather than how efficient are they. And then the other thing that you can do that's very useful there is 8-point story, excellent. Can we split it into smaller stories? Because if everything's an 8, it's probably more like it's 20, right? An 8-point story says, I'm really not sure how to do this. I'm not sure, what it is that's there. Most high-performing Agile teams, if they're using story points, very quickly get down to 5, 3, point stories, and most of their stories are 3 and 5s. And many of them actually get down to 3. Okay?
Then talk about different teams might take the same backlog item and estimate at different story points. Have you run into frequently, let's say, Team A, this story for Team A is 8, and this story for Team B is 5. But if you switch this goes from a 5 to a 3, this goes from an 8 to a 5, because, actually the teams are good at those particular stories, so if you assign it right, they can do it within much fewer story points.
Okay. So the question was, if two different teams are estimating similar stories and they were to swap because they have different skill sets,
Right.
are the estimates going to come out differently? So I would actually rephrase that question. I would say, let's take a look at that question. I think that's very likely pointing out a very common thing, which is a lot of people, when they estimate in story points, are not estimating in story points. What they're doing is they're trying to equate it to hours. One of the very important things about story points is that you have a cross-functional team, and that team is estimating what is it going to take for me to get this story, all the things that need to be done over the goal line. Right? Not it's 2 points for QA and it's 3 points for dev, and we add them together. It's not an average. It's that the team agrees that this is however many points it is, and that that's relative to the simplest thing that they would do. So if they can get a story done in, say, I don't know, half a day, as the whole team, right, from this is what the story is to we could put it out as a patch today, and they can do it in half a day, that's probably the simplest thing that anybody could do. That's a 1. And if they say that something else is a 5, that means that they could either do 5 of these or 1 of those, right? If they're not thinking that way, then those aren't story points. Because if you switch teams and they actually understand the stuff better, they don't understand stuff as well, then they're going to say that 1, right, is a 5, and the 5 is a 25. Divide them both by 5, you've got 1 and 5 again. right? So it's relative and it should come out the same. If it doesn't come out the same, it's probably because there's something that wasn't understood there. But then how quickly it's performed absolutely has to do with who's going to actually work on it, right? So if I've estimated a 1-point story and then I work on it, it takes me an hour, well, let's flip it around. It takes you an hour, it might take me 2 days. But the complexity didn't change, it's just that I haven't done that before. All right, okay, another question?
You had an example where you showed an epic that was 8 and you split it out and you ended up with 3 5s. It happens all the time. If you do all of your splitting before you cost justify your project, you're close to big requirements up front. If you do your economic justification based on your epics, then your cost per story point or your total cost is going to be wrong, not because your estimates are wrong, but because you haven't done the decomposition yet.
Sure, okay, so the question was, if I want an estimate that's accurate for something really big that might take, say, 3 months, and I do all the estimating, then I'm getting kind of close to big upfront design. But on the other hand, if I do a swag at the estimate of this big thing and don't spend all that time, I'm probably going to get an inaccurate estimate. So what do I do? Yeah, that's a tough question, but consulting would be good for that. Seriously though, so actually, if it's a brand new project, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Do a sprint or two, right? It's cheap money. It's cheap money. You might be thinking, whoa, we're going to experiment with $100,000. You guys are experimenting with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars all the time anyway. So why not experiment a little better, right? So do a couple of sprints and then decide whether or not you want to keep going. Then that team has a better idea of what they're doing. And sure, spend the time. It's not big upfront design because remember, we're not generating these huge requirements documents. We're doing user stories, and generally that can be done really quickly. I've seen teams estimate user stories 3 months out in a couple of days, right? A couple of days, that's easy money, that's cheap money. Yeah, I would never take a swag in a large project because that never works out well.
We're expected to have accurate estimates on 5-year projects.
Okay, so the question, actually wait, I think it was a statement. We're expected to have accurate estimates on 5-year projects. That's not a problem that anybody can solve. Sorry. But I'd be willing to do it for a while. All right, other questions? Thanks for that. Yep.
In breaking up stories, how do you address the issue that some people say you shouldn't have something that doesn't have demonstrable benefit to the customer? Like at some point, you need to build, you're going to break it up past the point where the customer's going to see anything.
Okay. If you've done that, you probably, so I think the question was, couldn't you go too far on this breaking up user stories?
Well, I'm not sure it's going too far. What I'm saying is, let's say you need to do a certain amount of infrastructure before you can do the thing that the customer will see. Do you break that up into 2 different stories?
Okay, I'm not a big believer in you might have to do a lot of infrastructure to do something that the customer can see. It's always possible. So for instance, I'll use another Acura example. Acura was up and running and versioning stuff in 2 weeks. And the reason was there was no infrastructure. There was no client server, there was no database, it was all stored in a text file, and it worked, and it had 1 user. It was great, and I was able to get the value in 2 weeks. So I think you could do that with anything. The question, the thing is, and it's a mindset thing, is it's really hard to think about doing stuff like that. A text file, that's not professional. It's going to be client server, but just make a direct call right now, that's not professional. That's no good. It's really hard to get past that, but it can be done. So you can always break something up into a small piece and do a vertical slice all the way through, even if you're not going to ship it and have something to show. Another good example that I like to use there is Twitter. What is Twitter but the status updates of Facebook? Right, very small, but apparently a lot of value. Okay, another question?
Yeah, talking about infrastructure, I go back to your slide of that German monster machine. I mean, it takes a lot of time to get that machine, time and physical infrastructure, to get that machine to where it can be used. And by the way, I just want to thank you for giving me ammunition to argue against what I think is the worst phrase in all of software, which is low-hanging fruit.
Okay, there was some low-hanging fruit in what you just said. There was a question and an interesting statement. I'll start out with the interesting statement. The interesting statement was, you just gave me, I don't know what the ammo is, let's talk after, I'm curious to hear that. You gave me a lot of good ammo to fight against the ubiquitous phrase in software, low-hanging fruit, which you know, is, let's do the easy stuff first. And then let's forget about the important stuff because we ran out of time. Yeah, I hate that. That's really bad. But the question was, you just showed this giant science fiction monster infrastructure thing at the beginning, that big machine. Gotcha. It took a long time to build that thing before you could use it. Yeah, you're right.
And to move it from one place.
Yeah, to move it from one place to another. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, so it's a good point, but the thing is that I like to use physical examples to illustrate an analogy, but the cool thing about software is it's like magic, right? You know, it's more like wizardry and magic than it is like physical stuff. So I can use a text file and direct call to do something very quickly and then replace it later with a database and client-server infrastructure. Whereas that big machine, I got to build it before I can use it. You're absolutely right. Yay, we're in software. In the back, in the red.
So we're having a debate right now actually about Reese and the concept of the minimum viable product. And so where the on the engineering side, where the conversation's been going with product marketing is, when is it viable?
Yep.
And sort of down the road of, we can't ship it yet because we're not sure it's viable yet. Sort of
Okay, we can't ship it yet because we're not sure it's viable. That's a really good question. I would say, if it was my money, I personally don't care about minimum viable, marketable feature or whatever. I think it's an interesting concept, and it's better than traditional development for sure, because your minimum, in traditional development, your minimum is the whole thing, right? That's not much of a minimum. So I would say it's good to do experiments. You can always experiment, right? So if you're going to add something like a new way to do mortgages or whatever, having a mortgage calculator is pretty cool. Let's start that out. See if anybody actually ever uses the mortgage calculator, and maybe they go to a competitor at the beginning. But if they're using a mortgage calculator, that's cool. That's good to know, right? You can do these little experiments, and there's another thing you can do. So one of my clients right now is a large financial institution, and they do this all the time with their employees. Their employees are account holders in their own bank. You got the people in IT with accounts, and they're marked in the database as employees. They put out new features that employees will see and can use them. If the employees don't use them, why bother? Right, so there's a lot of ways that you can skin that cat. It doesn't have to be for people outside the building. And even when it's people outside the building, with traditional development, that software is so hard to change. Right? You wouldn't think of doing experiments like, let's make it so just this one customer can use it, and the next week we'll make it for a different customer. But with Agile development, you could do that. And so you can find out, you've got this one customer that says, I don't care about all those other people, I want that thing now. And if you give it to them and they say, that's not really what I meant, that's valuable. So there's always a way to skin that cat. Andy?
I was just going to comment that the way that I think about minimum viable is not the way the marketing side would think about it. He thinks about it as viable for the customer, but the way I think about it in the early stages is you're using your customer to develop your product. You don't care if it works for them, you care if you get feedback from them. Viable is viable feedback for you.
Right, absolutely. So thank you, Andy. Andy was saying that minimum viable is something that's viable for you, that you get feedback that you can use to make a decision, right? Because anything that you can use to make a better decision is valuable and viable. Okay, others? Anton?
Suppose you don't per point, so you have like $14 on the slide, right? But you cannot rely on this number because it's always changing. 2 guys left the team, your velocity goes doubles, your cost double. And then you're gonna make decision, and somebody gives you $40,000, but you're gonna be at loss just because of that event that you guys left.
Oh, okay, so I think that was a statement, but let me see if I can change it into a question.
How do you address?
No, that was for humor purposes. So the question was, that's really cool, but I don't think velocity stays constant. And actually that's what a lot of the lean Kanban folks say, is that velocity is an interesting thing, but studies have shown that it varies wildly over time. So your velocity that you use for planning a sprint is going to be wrong half the time. And that's a really good point. So, but the point there is that it's a tool that you can use to help make a decision. And if your velocity, right, so over a year's period, it's probably not going to, it's probably going to average out to something that you could use. And it's going to be a lot easier to use that to make a decision than, hoping that your Gantt chart is right and then all the cost accounting that you've done is right. I don't think anybody would, I don't think many people would be able to use that to make snap decisions.
One thing I had noticed is this was about cost and business, and in the beginning was cost of business, and they sort of wandered back into software engineering. So one thing is that you can take into account the changes, for example, that you lost 2 of your best software developers by adding in business risk, and that's there's a whole thing on how to do business risk. So you just put that into account when you do your estimates.
Okay, I'm not sure what the question was there.
The question was, well, it's not really a question.
Okay.
How do you
Okay.
incorporate business risk?
Okay, how do you incorporate business risk? I don't know. That's not one of my talking points. But one of the things I can say about that in general is that the smaller your user stories are, the quicker you can deliver value, the less risk you have, because you're going to figure out right away what's going on. I like that interesting comment that I wandered back into software engineering. Actually, I think one of my main points here, maybe it was kind of subtle, is that I want to blur the line between software engineering and business. Because at the end of the day, nobody pays for software engineering. Sorry, there's no such job. There's only jobs that produce business value through software engineering. Right? So the idea is that as people in software engineering, we need to start thinking of ourselves more as business people and invest in the business. Because at the end of the day, we want more column A and less of column B. Okay, I think we have time for about 2 more.
Yeah, they had that nice box, high value, high cost, and so on, and you had split, do, avoid. The lower right, where it was low both ways, was a question mark. How do you work the question mark?
Okay, so the question was, thanks for that quadrant slide with the avoid, split, do, and the question mark, but you never explained what the question mark was. Yeah, that's why there's a question mark there. I don't know. Right, so I think that might also be a void. If it's low value, regardless of the cost, maybe avoid it. I'm thinking about reframing that in terms of ratios of ROI. So if the ratio is high, do it. If the ratio is low, don't do it. But that's why there's a question mark. I'm not sure. Yep. Last question.
I'm interested how, when you're practicing Kanban type of process, how do you know when to shift? If it's a continuous development, continuous producing.
How do I know when to shift?
Know when to shift to an actual client.
Okay. If I'm doing Kanban, it's this continual process. How do I know when to shift? Okay. What role do you generally play? Business analyst. I would ask you. I would say, hey, should we ship now? That I think is a classic product management business analyst thing of when have I produced enough value to ship, right? And another way to look at that is if you're defining what the product is, in a traditional sense, okay, here's the 1.0 of the product, you've sort of defined shipping as when all of that is done. right? Because you believe that that's the value. To turn that back around, really it's a question of when do you think we've produced enough value to make sense, because there's always some overhead, right, for shipping. And one of the things that people look at there is a common objection that I used to hear, I don't hear it as much anymore, but is our customers just couldn't take it that fast. Well, who's taking it? Who would? Right? You put it out there, that doesn't mean they take it. They'd be like, that's not a good time, I don't want it. Right? And if you have one customer, then don't give it to them. Just keep showing them over here and tempt them and say, you could have it now. And likely, if they're trusting you now because you're using Agile as opposed to the old way where they don't trust you, and that's why they don't want it, right? Then they'll probably take it a little bit more frequently. But just because you have something available doesn't mean somebody wants it. If you have a lot of customers, there's always going to be somebody that will take it, and they'll take it when their window of opportunity is there anyway. So it's not that, unless you're forcing the product on people, it's kind of a non-question. So for instance, I'm not saying Rally is forcing it on their users, but Rally releases, I think it's like every 2 weeks now or something crazy, right? And the reason that they're able to do that is because they were creating a rapport and trust with their customers over time where people just didn't even notice that they were shipping it frequently because it was fine. So there's that side too. All right, with that, I think we're done. And I will definitely be going for beer afterwards. So when they talk about beer later, it's fun. So let's go have some beer after. All right, thanks.